a Roman draws a circle in the sand and orders a king to choose: leave Egypt or face Rome. How did we get here? In the autumn of 332, Alexander the Great was welcomed into Egypt as a liberator from Persian rule. The Persian satraps surrendered without a fight, and Alexander, showing respect for Egyptian traditions, travelled to Memphis to be crowned as pharaoh in the traditional way. He paid homage to the Egyptian gods, even consulting the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, and founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast that he named Alexandria. Alexander's adoption of pharaonic titles and rituals was unprecedented for a Greek conqueror, and helped legitimize his rule over Egypt by invoking the age-old ideology of divine kingship. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, his empire fragmented among his generals. In the ensuing scramble, or the Wars of the Diadochi, his friend and bodyguard, Ptolemy son of Lagos, took control of Egypt, first as its satrap or governor, and soon as an independent ruler. Ptolemy swiftly consolidated his power. He eliminated a leftover administrator, Cleomenes of Naucratis, and appropriated the immense wealth he had accumulated. Ptolemy even hijacked Alexander's mummified body en route to Macedonia and brought it to Egypt, knowing that burying Alexander would cement his own legitimacy as the conqueror's heir. Perdiccas, the empire's regent, knew this as well and marched on Egypt, but failed in disastrous Nile crossing attempts, amounting to heavy losses, and was assassinated by his own officers. Ptolemy's position in Egypt was effectively secured. From 315 to 311, the most dangerous rival, Antigonus the One-Eyed, tried to reunify the empire. With Seleucus, another of the Diadochi, Ptolemy beat Antigonus's son Demetrius at Gaza, which also allowed Seleucus to reclaim Babylon. But in 306, Demetrius crushed Ptolemy's fleet at Salamis, off of Cyprus, and Demetrius and his father Antigonus proclaimed themselves kings. During Demetrius's failed siege of Rhodes in the next couple of years, Ptolemy's aid to the island cements the epithet of Soter, or savior, and his image as protector of the Greek world. Amid the ongoing wars, Ptolemy declared himself Basileus, or king and pharaoh of Egypt, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule for nearly 300 years. The war's climax at Ipsus in 301 saw Antigonus and Demetrius defeated, and the empire was definitively split. The region called Cilicyria, the southern Levant, was awarded to Seleucus after Ipsus. But Ptolemy had already garrisoned troops there to help create his maritime empire. Though nominally part of Seleucus's holdings, he allowed Ptolemy control as they aided each other during the Battle of Gaza, which allowed Seleucus to cement his rule. Ptolemy and Seleucus's successors, though, would have no such rapport with each other. Despite Ptolemy not being at Ipsus, he kept Egypt, Cyrenaica, and the eastern Mediterranean sea lanes. Cyrenaica was centered on 5 cities: Cyrene, Apollonia, Ptolemais, Taucera, Berenice. They thrived on grain, horses, and the fabled silphium plant. There, Ptolemy installed his stepson, Magas, as governor. Soon, Ptolemy reasserted control of Cyprus and set up garrisons in western Anatolia, Crete, and Phoenicia, forming the basis of a maritime empire. By the time of his death, Ptolemy had established a strong kingdom centered on Egypt and initiated a tradition of cultural patronage and fusion, blending Greek and Egyptian practices in a way that has fascinated scholars ever since. Ptolemy laid the foundations of Alexandria's legendary intellectual life. He is traditionally credited with founding the Library of Alexandria and its associated Museon, inviting learned men from across the Greek world. The mathematician Euclid famously taught in Alexandria during Ptolemy's reign, compiling his Elements. Ptolemy also patronized the Egyptian scholar Manetho, who under Ptolemy's auspices recorded the history of Egypt's pharaohs in Greek, an effort to bridge Greek and Egyptian understandings of the past. As one anecdote of cultural fusion, Ptolemy introduced the cult of Serapis. This new syncretic god combined aspects of the Egyptian Osiris Apis bull with Greek deities Zeus or Hades. The Serapis cult, centered at the Serapeum in Alexandria, was a powerful symbol of the two cultures' union. Ptolemy's careful statecraft ensured that by the time of his death in 283 BCE, Egypt was strong, prosperous, and culturally unique in the Hellenistic world. The reign of Ptolemy II is often seen as the zenith of Ptolemaic prosperity and cultural brilliance. He inherited a wealthy kingdom and maintained his father's policies of economic development and patronage of the arts. The court at Alexandria sparkled with material and literary splendor. Ptolemy II lavishly funded the Library of Alexandria's expansion and sponsored scholars, poets, and scientists. The poet Callimachus was the library's master cataloguer. Theocritus, Apollonius of Rhodes, and others composed works praising the Ptolemaic family. It was likely during this era that the library amassed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, preserving and producing knowledge. Traditions also credit Ptolemy II with commissioning the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, and later in the dynasty, Jewish high priest Onias IV established a Jewish temple at Leontopolis, rivaling the one in Jerusalem. In a move shocking to Greeks but common with Egyptian royal custom, Ptolemy married his full sister, Arsinoe II, after repudiating his first wife. Just as their father was given the epithet of Soter, Ptolemy and his wife were both given the epithet Philadelphus, or sibling lovers. This institutionalized sibling marriage was meant to emulate the divine marriage of Isis and Osiris in Egyptian tradition, or Zeus and Hera in the Greek, a way to legitimize the Ptolemies as gods on earth to their subjects. Native Egyptians, who revered sibling deities, reportedly approved of the practice, and subsequent Ptolemies followed this precedent. Both appeared in Egyptian style on temple reliefs and participated in local religious life. They introduced the Ptolemaea, a grand festival in Alexandria likened to the Olympic Games, and he deified his parents, Ptolemy I and the late Queen Berenice, as gods. The state ran a tight command economy, with monopolies on oil, papyrus, and linen, issued land grants for soldier settlers, called clerics, and bilingual paperwork in Greek and Demotic. This made Egypt's cash flow predictable and paid for fleets, fortresses, and temples. Though Ptolemy's reign was prosperous, he faced struggles early on. Magas of Cyrene, his stepbrother, allied with Antiochus I of the Seleucid Empire, and in 274 they attacked from west and east. Magas fell back after unrest in Libya, and Antiochus was stopped in the east. This First Syrian War ended with Egypt unscathed. After Magas's death in 250, his daughter was married to Ptolemy's son, effectively reuniting Cyrenaica with Egypt. At sea, Ptolemaic fleets dominated the Aegean, holding Cyprus, Cilicia, parts of Anatolia, and Cyclades. But after Antiochus II took power, a second Syrian war erupted. Egypt faced both the Seleucids and Macedonians, and ended up losing some territory, but the marriage of his daughter, Berenice Sira, to the Seleucid king sealed a peace. To the south, Ptolemy annexed Lower Nubia, a region called the Dodekashoinos by the Greeks, securing gold and building Red Sea posts like Ptolemy's Theron to supply African war elephants. By his reign's end, Egypt was the wealthiest of the successor states. Alexandria's harbours and lavish public works, like the Pharaohs Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, attested to that. But sibling marriage stoked future dynastic feuds, and far-flung holdings proved hard to keep. Upon the king's death, his son Ptolemy III Euergetes, meaning benefactor, inherited a vast realm. But almost immediately, he faced a foreign crisis that would mark the high point of Ptolemaic military might. In 246 BCE, his sister Berenice Sira, the daughter of Ptolemy II, who had been sent to the Seleucid court, was murdered, along with her infant son in a dynastic coup at Antioch. Seizing this pretext, Ptolemy III launched the Third Syrian War, determined to avenge his sister and assert Egypt's dominance. He led Ptolemaic armies deep into the heart of the Seleucid Empire, reportedly marching triumphantly as far as Babylonia in Mesopotamia. Apart from their core of Greco-Macedonian settler soldiers, the Ptolemaic army also relied on foreign mercenaries. A major contingent was from a group of Celtic tribes known as the Galatians, who had recently settled in central Anatolia. The Canopus decree of 238 BCE confirms that this campaign truly marked the zenith of Ptolemaic power. It even proposed a leap day every 4 years to fix the 365-day Egyptian calendar, an idea that foreshadowed the Julian reform in Rome. Egyptian fleets dominated the eastern Mediterranean, and the kingdom's borders were as extensive as ever. Although the Egyptian king did not permanently hold all his conquests, the psychological impact was immense, and Ptolemaic Egypt was seen as the preeminent Hellenistic power. Ptolemy's epithet of Euergetes, meaning benefactor, was earned in part by an act of pious nationalism. During his invasion of the Near East, he recovered and brought back to Egypt countless statues of Egyptian gods and sacred objects that had been looted during the Persian rule centuries earlier. This deed greatly endeared him to the Egyptian priesthood and populace, being celebrated in Egyptian inscriptions and contributing to his image as a restorer of Maat. Alongside this, Ptolemy continued the family tradition of temple building and restoration. He initiated construction of the Grand Temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt in 237 BCE, one of the most magnificent Egyptian temples ever built. Work on Edfu's relief-covered pylons and halls would continue through the reigns of his descendants. Ptolemy also added to the Temple of Isis at Philae, along with other sanctuaries. The king aggressively expanded the Great Library of Alexandria, with a famous anecdote saying he borrowed official copies of Athenian playwrights, then kept the originals and returned the copies. A second library was built at the Serapeum, ensuring that Alexandria's collection would be unrivaled. During Ptolemy's reign, Eratosthenes, who was appointed chief librarian at Alexandria, measured the Earth's circumference using sun shadows, a bold new scientific spirit encouraged by the dynasty. Other intellectual luminaries included the mathematician Apollonius of Perga and astronomer Aristarchus of Samos, who presented the first known heliocentric model, in which the Earth revolves around the Sun. Ptolemy III, like his father, saw knowledge as a pillar of royal glory, and Alexandria's academies preserved and produced works that spread Hellenistic culture far and wide. Despite this glittering image, signs of strain lurked beneath the prosperity. The burdens of near-constant warfare, heavy taxation, and the privileged status of Greeks increasingly weighed on the native Egyptian population. Still, as long as Ptolemy III lived, he managed to keep the kingdom stable and affluent. When he died in 221 BCE, Egypt was at the height of its glory. But after a century of cultural, military and economic prosperity, the kingdom was to experience 2 centuries of unraveling. The succession of Ptolemy IV Philopator in 221 BCE marked the start of a slow decline. Ptolemy IV, reportedly more interested in luxury, was dominated by court favourites and allowed royal authority to weaken. Early in his reign, he married his sister Arsinoe III, keeping up the practice of sibling marriage, and indulged in elaborate religious rites and orgiastic cults, notably devoted to the cult of Dionysus and Osiris. Governance suffered as competent ministers were sidelined by royal favourites. This internal frailty coincided with the rising vigour of the Seleucid Empire under their new ambitious king Antiochus III. In 219 BCE, Antiochus seized the long-disputed Cilicia region, aiming to wrest it from Ptolemaic control for good. Ptolemy's ministers scrambled to respond, raising a large army that for the first time included many native Egyptians alongside Greek and Macedonian troops. In 217, the two forces met at the Battle of Raphia. There, the Indian elephants under Antiochus faced Ptolemy's African ones. Despite Ptolemy's notorious indolence and his elephants breaking their lines to flee in fear, the Ptolemaic army achieved a great victory, largely thanks to the valor of the Egyptian soldiers. The victory at Raphia secured Ptolemaic control of Cilicia a while longer and was hailed as a national triumph. Egyptian and Greek elements of the kingdom had united to defeat the invader. But the short-term unity soon became long-term division. The native Egyptians, having been armed and crucial to victory, gained confidence in their strength and resented returning to subordination afterward, and the veneer of Greek superiority was pierced. In Upper Egypt, a nationalist revolt broke out. Local Egyptian leaders, possibly princes or priests named Hugronophor and later Ankh-Wenefer, proclaimed themselves pharaohs in Thebes and led a secession of Upper Egypt from Ptolemaic control. This great Theban revolt would last for nearly 20 years, a clear sign of internal weakness. During this period, more than half the country slipped out of the dynasty's grasp. The rebels even formed alliances with Egypt's old foe Kush. The Ptolemies eventually put down the revolt, but it required a major campaign in 186 to finally crush the last rebel stronghold at Thebes. The toll on the kingdom's unity and treasury was severe. Ptolemy IV himself died in 204, his capable wife murdered soon after, leaving the throne to their young son Ptolemy V Epiphanes, a child of about 5 years old. During Ptolemy V's minority, the kingdom was run by the incompetent palace clique that murdered his mother. With an ineffectual government, Egypt fell into near anarchy. Sensing weakness, Antiochus III made a secret pact with Philip V of Macedon. The Seleucid king invaded Cilicia once more, but this time, after decisive victory at Panium in 200 BCE, he wrested the prized province away for good. By 198 BCE, Judea and Syria had fallen to the Seleucids, ending over a century of Ptolemaic rule there. The Ptolemies, hard-pressed by the Egyptian revolt and internal strife, could mount little defense. Royal advisors had just one hope. During the war, Egypt appealed to the growing Roman Republic for aid. Rome, who had just stamped out Carthage in the Second Punic War, issued warnings to the Seleucids, but soon the pair were on a collision course that would decide the fate of the Eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, at Ptolemy's coronation in Memphis, Egyptian priests from across the country gathered and issued the Rosetta Decree in 3 scripts to honor the young king. This decree, later found on the famous Rosetta Stone, was written in hieroglyphic for priestly support, Demotic for the native population, and Greek, the language of the court and administration. It praised Ptolemy for tax relief and benefactions to the temples, and in return, the priesthood pledges loyalty. Ptolemy also took a significant political step by marrying a Seleucid princess, Cleopatra I Sira, Antiochus's daughter, part of a peace settlement. Their union produced future heirs, intertwining the bloodlines of 2 great Hellenistic dynasties. Despite these efforts, Ptolemy's reign ended tragically. He died around 180 BCE, reportedly by poisoning amid court intrigue. By that time, Egypt had lost most of its foreign empire. Syria, Phoenicia, Anatolia, and the Aegean were all gone. Only Cyprus and Cyrenaica remained. But instead of resurgence, the wheel of fortune spun towards family feud, leaving Egypt in jeopardy. When Ptolemy V died, his heir Ptolemy VI Philometor was only about 6 years old. His mother, Cleopatra, the Seleucid princess, acted as regent until her death in 176 BCE, maintaining peace with Syria and Rome. But once the young Ptolemy came of age, the old rivalry with the Seleucids reignited. Antiochus IV invaded Egypt in 170 in the 6th Syrian War, under the pretext of protecting his nephew the king from bad advisors. In truth, Antiochus sought to seize Egypt entirely, he managed to capture Memphis and even briefly installed Ptolemy VI as his puppet king. But Alexandria, fiercely anti-Seleucid, set up Ptolemy's younger brother, Ptolemy VIII Physcon, as counter-king. For the first time in centuries, an enemy occupied much of Egypt, and Antiochus proclaimed himself its conqueror, even minting coins with Egyptian imagery. But at this critical moment, Egypt experienced a fateful intervention. In 168 BCE, as Antiochus moved to conquer his rival in Alexandria, a Roman envoy, Gaius Popilius Laenas, confronted him at the nearby town of Eleusis. The Roman infamously drew a circle in the sand around the king, demanding that before he leave the circle, he choose one of these two options: agree to leave Egypt at once, or face war with Rome. A humbled Antiochus withdrew his forces. This became known as the Day of Eleusis, and epitomized Rome's new role as arbiter in Hellenistic quarrels. Egypt was saved from Syrian conquest not by its own arms, but by Roman decree. By Roman mediation, the elder Ptolemy was restored as king in Alexandria with his sister wife Cleopatra, while Ptolemy VIII was given the lesser role of governing Cyrenaica as a sort of consolation domain. But personal animosities ran deep. Ptolemy VI turned out to be a competent ruler and quite popular in Alexandria. He actually enjoyed a period of stability, even campaigning in Syria again, getting involved in a civil war. And surprisingly, he won the decisive battle uniting both kingdoms. But his injuries were too severe, and he tragically died just 3 days later, far from his home. His death opened the floodgates for Ptolemy VIII to seize the throne of Egypt at last. His reign was both long and notorious, at almost 30 years of cruelty and internal strife. Because of his unpopularity, he was described as bloated in body, hence his nickname Physcon, meaning pot-bellied or fat. He arrived in Alexandria and married his sister Cleopatra II, his brother's widow. But he soon took the shocking step of also marrying her daughter, Cleopatra III. This meant Physcon was simultaneously husband to a mother, who was his sister, and her daughter, who was his niece and stepdaughter. Cleopatra II, enraged by her husband's polygamy with her daughter, led a civil war against Physcon. For a time, Cleopatra controlled Alexandria and even proclaimed herself sole queen. She was the first female pharaoh after Tausret during the New Kingdom, almost 1,000 years prior. Ptolemy VIII and his niece-stepdaughter wife, Cleopatra III, fled to Cyprus along with his and Cleopatra the Elder's son, Ptolemy Memphites. The chaos reached gruesome extremes, and later legend claims Ptolemy had his son killed, dismembered, and sent back to his mother as a birthday gift. The civil war subsided only when Cleopatra II fled, and after mediation, they reconciled in 124 BCE. Ptolemy Physcon, Cleopatra III, and Cleopatra II all ruled together uneasily. Physcon finally died in 116, Cleopatra II soon after. Ptolemy's legacy continued though. He had earlier been granted Cyrenaica, and during the conflict he stationed himself there. There, he fathered an illegitimate son, Ptolemy Apion, whom he later left as ruler of the region. Upon his father's death, Cyrenaica became effectively separate under Ptolemy Apion's rule. But when he died in 96 BCE, Apion didn't bequeath Cyrenaica to the main Ptolemaic line. He gave it to Rome. Libya's Cyrenaica, long a Hellenistic Greek bastion, had passed into Roman hands without a fight, becoming a Roman client and later province. Egypt was increasingly isolated as a new Mediterranean shaped itself. Back in Alexandria, Ptolemy's death set off further dynastic struggles. He left the throne to his favoured wife Cleopatra III, who was to choose one of their sons as co-king. Cleopatra initially selected her elder son, Ptolemy IX, nicknamed Lathyros, or Chickpea. He had support among Alexandrians, but often clashed with his domineering mother. In 107 BCE, She deposed him as he fled to Cyprus, as she installed her younger son, Ptolemy X Alexander, as co-king. This musical chairs of monarchs continued the instability. Ptolemy X, in need of money and unpopular, may have looted the golden sarcophagus of Alexander the Great to pay troops, a sacrilege that outraged the populace. He also eventually turned against his mother and likely had her murdered. After this matricide, Ptolemy's position remained weak. In 88 BCE, the Alexandrians expelled him, welcoming back Ptolemy IX Lathyrus from Cyprus to rule for his final years. Ptolemy X fled and allegedly died at sea. Ptolemy IX ruled until his death in 80 BCE. His daughter, Berenice III, succeeded him, one of the few sole-ruling Ptolemaic queens, noted for her wisdom and popularity. But pressure came from Rome once more. A young man, and the king's son, Ptolemy XI, had been in Rome as a pawn and was sent to Egypt by the Roman dictator Sulla. Ptolemy XI married the much older Berenice, either his stepmother or cousin, to legitimize himself. But within weeks he had her murdered, an act that so enraged the Alexandrian populace that they lynched Ptolemy in the gymnasium. With his death, the direct legitimate male line of Ptolemies was almost exhausted. The throne then fell to an illegitimate, but more importantly, surviving member of the dynasty, Ptolemy XII Neos Dionysos, often called Orletes, the flute player. Ptolemy XII was a son of Ptolemy IX by a concubine, and a half-brother to the murdered but popular Berenice. But as Rome's influence was now paramount, he had to secure his kingship by bribing the powerful Republic. In 59 BCE, Julius Caesar, during his consulship, recognized Ptolemy as an ally and friend of Rome, a friendship with a price tag, as it came at considerable cost to the Egyptian treasury. Ptolemy's reign was marred by financial troubles, heavy taxes to pay Roman debts, and public discontent. When Rome annexed Cyprus, driving Ptolemy's brother to suicide, Alexandrians erupted in anger at the king's weakness. He was soon expelled in a popular uprising, and his eldest daughter, Berenice IV, took the throne, continuing the tradition of Ptolemaic queens. Ptolemy XII, who had always bent over backwards for Rome, lobbied for restoration, and in 55 BCE, with the help of Roman legions under Aulus Gabinius, he invaded Egypt and reclaimed his throne. Berenice was captured and executed by her own father, eliminating another heir. Ptolemy was now back in power, but at what cost? Egypt was effectively a client of Rome, reliant on Roman arms and deeply in debt to Roman moneylenders. Apart from being constantly broke, Ptolemy's chief legacy was securing the succession for his beloved daughter Cleopatra VII. When he died in 51 BCE, he left the throne jointly to the 18-year-old Cleopatra and her younger 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. Of course, he arranged them to be married according to custom. This arrangement was supposed to ensure stability. Instead, it set the stage for the final phase of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra VII Philopator has been immortalized in history and legend as a savvy, charismatic queen who sought to revive her dynasty's fortunes. Upon taking power in 51 BCE, Cleopatra, about 18 years old, was co-regent with her brother-husband Ptolemy XIII, around age 10. As to be expected, Cleopatra dominated this co-regency. Uniquely among her Greek-descended family, Cleopatra learned the Egyptian language and presented herself as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis, adopting the title Nea Isis. This endeared her to Egyptian subjects and priests, who saw her as a true pharaoh in the old mold. On coinage, she appeared in Greek style, with the diadem of Hellenistic kings, while in temple reliefs she wears the horned sun disk crown of Isis, offering to gods in the traditional Egyptian manner. She embodied the fusion of Greek and Egyptian royal ideals more fully than any Ptolemy before her. But Cleopatra's early years of rule were fraught with danger. Amid a famine and economic trouble, Cleopatra faced opposition from courtiers allied with her co-ruler Ptolemy, including the eunuch regent Pothinus and the general Achillas, who resented Cleopatra's dominance in governing. In 48, open conflict erupted between Cleopatra and her brother's faction. Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria and gather support in Syria. That same year brought a cataclysmic moment: the arrival of Julius Caesar. He arrived in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival, Pompey Magnus, during Rome's civil war. Pompey, who sought refuge in Egypt, had been murdered on Ptolemy's orders. Caesar came to Egypt to settle affairs. Cleopatra seized this moment. Famously, she had herself secretly brought into Caesar's quarters, legend says rolled in a carpet, and won the Roman general's favour with her intelligence and charm. Caesar, a stern 52 years old and victorious in previous wars, became Cleopatra's ally and lover. When her brother Ptolemy's forces, led by Pothinus and Achillas, besieged the palace, Caesar and Cleopatra endured the Alexandrian War. In the fighting, part of the great Library of Alexandria was accidentally burned. But it wasn't a grand destruction, perhaps just storehouses by the docks. Ptolemy and Cleopatra's other sister, Arsinoe IV, even proclaimed herself queen and took control of the Egyptian army against the Romans. She had stunning success, but it wasn't to last. Eventually, Caesar's reinforcements arrived, and Ptolemy's army was defeated on the Nile. The young king drowned during the fight. Arsinoe was exiled to the temple of Artemis in Anatolia, later to be executed on Cleopatra's orders. In the aftermath, Cleopatra, now aged 21, was restored as queen, co-ruling with another even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. Though married to Cleopatra, she remained Caesar's lover, and Ptolemy's kingship was in name only. The queen eventually bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, or Little Caesar. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra travelled to Rome with her entourage at Caesar's invitation. Caesar housed her in a villa and even reportedly dedicated a golden statue of Cleopatra Isis in the Temple of Venus. Cleopatra witnessed the centre of Roman power firsthand. But then came the Ides of March. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated, upending Cleopatra's presence in Rome. Sensing the tides turning, she quickly left and returned to Egypt. Soon after, her co-ruler Ptolemy XIV, now 15 years old, conveniently died, perhaps poisoned by his sister Cleopatra to consolidate power. She then named her baby son Caesarion as co-king Ptolemy XV, affirming him as her heir. Cleopatra reigned effectively as sole sovereign, with Caesarion in her lap. But though she tried to escape, Egypt was too entwined with Rome's turbulent politics. After Mark Antony and Octavian hunted down Caesar's killers, Antony, now one of the triumvirs, ruler of the eastern provinces, summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in southern Anatolia to pledge her loyalty. Cleopatra famously arrived on the Cydnus River in an extravagant spectacle, as Aphrodite incarnate on a gilded barge, a calculated display of wealth and allure. Antony, enamored, forged a partnership with Cleopatra that was both romantic and political. He spent the winter in Egypt, and in 40 BCE, she bore him twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. For the next several years, Cleopatra and Mark Antony cultivated a grand vision of an Eastern Hellenistic empire. Antony controlled Rome's eastern territories and relied on Cleopatra's riches and naval power for his campaigns. In 34 BCE, after a campaign in Armenia, Antony staged the Donations of Alexandria. This was a lavish ceremony in Alexandria, where he and Cleopatra, dressed as Dionysus, Osiris, and Isis, sat on golden thrones and distributed kingdoms to their children. Young Alexander Helios was named king of Armenia and Parthia, lands Antony hoped to conquer. Cleopatra Selene was given Cyrenaica and Crete, and the infant Ptolemy Philadelphus, their third child together, was titled ruler of Syria, Phoenicia, and Cilicia in southern Anatolia. This flaunting vision of empire, especially proclaiming young Caesarion as King of Kings, alarmed Octavian, Mark Antony's longtime ally. They had joined forces to defeat those who orchestrated Julius Caesar's assassination, but now Octavian led a propaganda war in Rome, portraying Antony as bewitched by an Oriental queen and betraying Roman values. After the donations debacle, Antony divorced Octavian's sister. In 32 BCE, the Roman Senate, at Octavian's instigation, stripped Antony of his offices and declared war, not against Antony, but against Cleopatra, to frame it as a foreign conflict. The climactic showdown came at Actium on the western coast of Greece on September 2nd, 31 BCE. Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces met Octavian's fleet under Marcus Agrippa. The battle turned into a rout when Cleopatra, perhaps foreseeing defeat, took her Egyptian fleet and broke away from the fight. Antony followed her, abandoning the battle. Octavian won a decisive victory. The next year, Octavian invaded Egypt itself. Antony, desperate and hearing false rumors Cleopatra had died, fell on his sword. Cleopatra, barricaded in her mausoleum, allowed Octavian to capture her after Antony's death. But facing the humiliation of being paraded in a Roman triumph, Cleopatra committed suicide, according to the most famous account, by the bite of a venomous asp. She was 39 years old, and with her death, the line of Ptolemaic rulers came to an end. Caesarion, her 17-year-old son and last hope for an independent dynasty, was captured and executed on Octavian's orders. So it came to pass in 30 BCE, Egypt was annexed by Rome, becoming a province under Octavian, soon to be Augustus Caesar. After roughly 3 centuries, the Ptolemaic kingdom, the last of Alexander's successor states, had fallen. To prevent future rebellions, Roman emperors kept Egypt under tight personal control. Senators needed imperial permission to even visit. Alexandria remained a vibrant city, second only to Rome, and continued as a center of Hellenistic culture under Roman rule. Greek language and institutions persisted, and Greek even remained the language of government and commerce in Egypt, centuries into the Roman period. The blending of cultures that the Ptolemies had fostered also endured. Egyptian religion, Isis in particular, spread widely through the Roman Empire, attracting many Roman devotees. As a Roman province, Egypt remained one of the richest and most learned lands. Although Cleopatra's suicide marked the end of pharaonic rule, in many ways her life embodied the grand synthesis of her era. A Greek queen who spoke Egyptian, worshipped Isis, romanced Roman generals, and nearly resurrected her ancient kingdom's empire, only to be remembered by history as the last pharaoh of Egypt.